Thank you so much. Bunch of critics on the couch. We'll keep talking. So if you want to be heard, please raise your hand in the middle of the conversation. Don't feel bad for interrupting us, but we do have some time at the end of the panel for some questions. With me is Beandrea July, Jason Asenap, and Jason England, two Jasons. And I think Angelica is joining us via Zoom. Please give her a huge round of applause and wave to her so she sees it. So I work at the Philly Inquirer. I work in a newspaper, and I just wanted to start off by, there is this distinction as if critics are not journalists, as if what we say is not based on facts. And there is always this, and Jason, you and I were chatting, like, we are called all sorts of things, but not culture journalists, not reporters. So I just wanted to start off with that provocation, that where do you think culture criticism stands vis-a-vis reportage or mainstream journalism?
Well, just to continue what we were talking about, me personally, first of all, thank you for having me, BlackStar Film Festival and Critical Minded, thank you very much. It's glad to be here. Yeah, there's a whole, for me in particular, there's a whole backstory just before I even sit down and fire up the laptop to talk about film. There's like, I've acted, I've directed, I've written, primarily I'm writing about my culture. And so there's all of that history that informs the writing that I do. And the reason I do that writing, Indigenous film criticism is primarily like my beat. The reason I do that is because I felt like that it wasn't being done correctly, or there was none of us doing it. There was no Indigenous writers writing film criticism. And so coming from a filmmaking aspect, I was like, I need to step in and do this. And it's been received pretty well, I would say. But we need to have respect for we need to have respect for the cultural critics, because there's a lot of information that informs our writing.
Let me read something Jason wrote. And this was a piece on the latest Scorsese film. And Jason writes, "In the dark of the cinema, I heard the disgust of these descendants of colonialism, angry at their own ancestors. But what would happen later? Would they then go home to their large, fancy Santa Fe houses acquired through years of generational wealth? After they finished decrying America's horrible past, would they drain their glasses of Pinot Noir and just move on? Would they remember the whole thing as a
Recording in progress.
Okay, that's good to know. Would they remember the whole thing as a Martin Scorsese movie starring Robert De Niro and Leonardo DiCaprio, and let the particulars of Osage genocide and generational pain fall from their minds?" And this is, I quote this because for me, this is journalistic. You are not making a thing up in what you're saying. So, which is basically the TLDR here is culture criticism is journalism. That's the argument I'm making. Angelica, I'd love to have you weigh in.
You know what's funny about this question? I don't really consider myself a journalist in the traditional sense, to be completely honest. I know that may be a really interesting thing to say, but I always look at criticism as straddling various sort of intersections. It is involved in journalism, especially if you interview people and you're kind of doing on-the-ground reporting or like a set visit. But I actually kind of look at criticism, at least the criticism I do, as both a historical record for what's going on in the world at the moment and where history and the present meet. And I honestly consider myself more of an artist, but I'm also pretentious, so it may be a little bit of that, to be honest.
Well, a little bit of Angelica's artistry. This is her piece she wrote after Beyonce's Renaissance came out, the movie. With Formation from 2016's Lemonade, Beyoncé alchemized the aesthetics of black radicalism. In the video, she's played out on a cop car in New Orleans that descends into murky waters. In her Super Bowl performance from that year, she and her dancers were decked in an all-black ensemble with raised fists meant to evoke the style of the Black Panthers without the group's moral clarity and political conviction. When Beyoncé uses their aesthetic along with the words of Malcolm X, it behooves audiences and critics alike to hold her to a greater standard. Her apoliticism should not slide by. Which is the entire piece is a masterpiece, but that little paragraph really stood out to me. Beandrea and Jason, I would love to know why you think criticism is important. Why should people be reading criticism?
Yeah, well, I mean, to the earlier discussion, I would definitely say that film critics are journalists. I mean, my first job out of college was here in Philly at a grassroots newspaper that no longer exists, where we wrote exclusively about the Philadelphia public schools. And one time I had been to all the public schools in Philadelphia, but a lot of them have closed. This was a long time ago. But I say all that to say that I'm like very much a journalist, and I sort of came to film criticism because people kept asking me to do it. And I didn't really know that I could do it until people started asking me to do it. And I think when I'm writing, my opinions don't just come from, somewhere in the sky. I mean, there is an instinctual aspect of it, but I'm doing a lot of research. Like, I'm looking at the other movies this person has made, if they're a new filmmaker. I'm trying to figure out what is it that this person was trying to do and trying to look at how successful I think they were at doing that, And so I'm gathering all information that I can from multiple sources to get that. And I just think that that is what distinguishes, professional film critics from people who are sprouting opinions. And I'm not denigrating people who are just, shooting from the hip. I'm just saying there's a difference. And so, yeah, I think criticism matters because culture matters and storytelling matters. And, in 100 years, somebody's going to do like a thesis on one of your films, and they're going to look at the reviews that were written about your film when they write their thesis, whether we want them to or not, And so it does have an impact. I think a lot about the archive, and that's, for me, the difference.
Yeah, this is interesting because... this is interesting because, with all the criticism against Robert Flaherty and his style of documentary filmmaking, and we all think it's a new thing, the criticism against him, but I went back many years ago to the archives and saw there were Native film critics, Native American journalists who were calling him out all those many years ago. So, to think that criticism is this trend is just doing injustice to so many journalists, culture journalists who've come before us. Jason, you're also an academic, so I would love to know why you write criticism and why you think criticism is important.
I don't know that I want to identify as an academic. I'm going to retract that. I do work at a university, and I want to say I would never disrespect anybody on this panel and text during it. So if you see me like furiously texting, like doing things, I'm writing notes. I was thinking about this. I teach nonfiction and fiction, and something that's very interesting to me is that my students, they treat writing and critical thinking in a different way from other skills, whether it's in the sciences or the humanities. Right? You would never, ever go for a piano lesson and just start smashing your hands on the piano and say, this is what I do, this is my process. Yeah. And people do that with writing. They assume, I speak English, I've read books, I can just write stuff, right? And I think criticism is very similar. Sure, it's subjective, but it's like a subjectivity that is as close to being objective as possible. It's like Nietzsche, it's perspectivism. You've read the books, you've filtered all of the perspectives through your perspective to arrive at something that approximates a truth. And also there's experiential knowledge, right? And so this reminds me, I wrote a piece about hip hop at 50, and I recall someone forwarding me, I don't do social media very much, someone forwarded me some guy who had said, we've got to stop letting cultural outsiders tell us what's what. I'm from fucking Harlem, all right? And my cousin is Kool Keith from the Ultramagnetic MCs. My family is generations deep in rap and in Harlem, and this dude from like Maryland or something was calling me a cultural outsider, right? And so I think that there's something about social media, because I do believe that the public intellectual exists and that you can become a public intellectual without any of these fancy titles. But there's something about what we wanted from criticism in terms of opening it up to other people that resulted in a downward democratization where every opinion matters, and I just don't think that's true. I think you have to have an informed perspective because you have to respect the conversation. You have to respect that you're in conversation with history and the moment, right? And I think this is incredibly important. The danger is, in the context of an incredibly hyper-capitalistic society, you have to separate criticism from boosterism and marketing. And I think that's kind of where we are. And it hurts you, and I know my panelists know this, to write something that could be critical and political, even if it's a group where you feel you're in the in-group, if it goes against people's financial interests at this point. And that scares me about where criticism is.
You know, I will turn the conversation into, you know, because this is a conversation among critics of color. But before that, happy 100th birthday, James Baldwin. We are here because, I mean, we are running because he walked, and what a lovely walk. But Angelica, we talked about this when we chatted before our panel. You also had similar anxieties about criticism veering more and more into the realm of PR.
Yeah, this is something I talk about a lot, both amongst my peers, and by peers I mean my close friends that I actually trust that are also writers. I honestly think a lot of blowback I've received, whether from that Beyonce review or not even always takedowns. People look at my work as takedowns and very venomous. I think it's because we have now started to confuse criticism with PR, because a lot of film critics move like they're in PR, and they're more interested in what swag they get and which celebrity they can take pictures with than actually putting care, putting research, putting time into the archives to really bolster their opinions and give audiences that read their work a worthwhile perspective. Speaking of James Baldwin, I actually have right over here The Devil Finds Work, which is his book that delves into film criticism. And the way he holds people's feet to the fire and really makes such stunning historical and aesthetic connections is where I think we should be looking and where we should be working as critics. But I think it's far easier today to do the boosterism, like Jason says. It's far more lucrative. I don't think it will last and create lasting work or worthwhile work, but I think that's the reason why people are kind of moving like that. And it's really upsetting because it ends up making the waters of criticism murky and confusing people about what actual criticism is. I'm not on the street team. I'm not trying to be your fan or your friend. I'm trying to write work that I think matters and can last the test of time and offers my community something worthwhile.
Thank you for that. Beandrea, before I let you talk, I'm going to read something, my absolute favorite passage from something you wrote. White people are supporting the Black Lives Matter movement. You wrote it after you watched an episode of Insecure. White people are supporting the Black Lives Matter movement in unprecedented numbers now, so it follows that they should show up for Black stories. Part of our current racial reckoning has to include white people interrupting their viewing habits and embracing content that does not center around white characters. Maybe that will finally encourage the studios to put their money where their 2020 Black Lives Matter press releases are. So we're 4 years on.
I know, and now I think about that, I'm like, do I still think that? I don't know. I think that you just always hear that. Like it became, where it first came to my attention was when Genji Cohan was being interviewed on Fresh Air by Terry Gross, and she was just sort of unapologetically saying that she chose intentionally to center this prison drama around a white woman because she knew that it would get greenlit, and she didn't think, and it wouldn't have if it was about any of the characters of color. Meanwhile, we all know we watched the show for the characters of color, right? Like Piper was the least interesting person in the show. You know, I just wanted to kind of argue with that because I think that it's complicated. We talk about representation matters, which it absolutely does, but what we don't talk about as much is that misrepresentation and erasure has also mattered. Like it's, you know, like the fact that not only were we not there for a long time, that there used to be a page in the back of Jet that said when black people are on TV, that when we were there, they got it completely wrong. And they actively troped us and, you know, presented an image that was inaccurate, you know? And so I think white people in particular, they can't be satisfied with just, you know, doing what they do. Like they have to also watch these programs that we are, you know, given homework to watch, even though some of us, we don't want to watch them, which, you know, is also another topic to discuss. You know, we watched a lot of stuff that we're like, I don't know if I really love this, but I want more things to be made, so I'm going to watch this.
I was in film school in 2016, and we had to watch Birth of a Nation.
Oh,
we
God.
had to. It was homework. Yeah.
Yeah, oh God, don't get me started on that Birth of a Nation, my God. But yeah, I would pass to the other critics on that.
Jason, and again, like, you know, our little chat before the panel opened up so many things. You know, there's this thing about assigning black films to black critics, indigenous films to indigenous journalists. But there's also this tacit underlying agreement that you'll write good things about it. And Jason, which brings me to your fantastic article on American fiction, which, you know, before I read your piece was a film I loved. So I want both of you to talk, and all of you weigh in about this idea of a black critic for a black film. Like, I can write about Pasolini, like, why can't, you know? So this idea of, but also at the same time, I'm a South Asian critic. I want to write about South Asian films. I do think I bring in a perspective that is important. So how do each of you navigate that?
I think it's tricky. You know, I think all of these things are complex and layered, right? And so ideally, do you want someone who has a perspective informed by experience and intellectual achievement and depth? Yeah, of course you do. At the same time, that's kind of what the Academy is based on, ideally, right?
Yeah.
I don't actually have a problem with a random white person who's done incredible research, you know, doing a review of whatever. Like, that's kind of how it works. And I also do have a problem with a random black person who I went to college with, who I know doesn't know a certain genre and only ever hung out with white people, suddenly being the authority on blackness. Yeah, it's like, you know, I see that on social media. I'm like, huh, that's curious as well. So there's obviously nuance to it, and we all know it when we read it. And that was what was interesting about American fiction, or what I wrote about American fiction. It wasn't what I wrote, it was the response it got. It was the fact that so many people emailed me clandestinely, friends of the director, famous authors. They were like, thank you for this. Why won't you say something? It's so important that we not reduce criticism and intellectual pursuit to the lowest bar of late-stage capitalism, which is getting people to invest in bad product as identity. That's terrifying. And I'm not one of those people, obviously. I worked in civil rights as well. Like, I'm not, in wokeness and DEI is bad. You know, it's like, that's not me. But at the same time, when people have subverted diversity and representation to the extent that it waters down the actual conversation, it frightens me. And that's the only reason I wrote that, out of concern. And I want to say, I want this to be clear. I think something about hip hop in the 2000s infiltrated criticism, which is like this idea that if you don't like an album or the watering down of music, that you're a hater. I didn't think that would infiltrate the intellectual circles. If you critique something, to me, it's proof that you love it. It's almost like having a good parent.
Yep.
I know you can do better in this, and I know you understand why you have to do better. I know you understand the stakes. And I think we used to understand that a lot more than we do now.
And let me read from this piece that we are referring to, and then I'll keep my phone away. In the social media era, the superficial markers of Black culture have been so successfully co-opted by mainstream culture that our very notion of Black identity has become flattened, where it once was double-edged. So maybe it shouldn't be a surprise that American fiction is plagued by sterility, where one would expect subversiveness, an effect of flattering the white audience where the aim should be to unsettle it. In that way, the film functions a lot like a repackaged, highfalutin version of the lowest common denominator, ultra-commodified art, erasure, the original text, lampoons. It's a spectacle that engenders feelings without any need for self-reflection. And I just think, and going back to Angelica's review of Renaissance as well, I also think it takes so much courage to bring down our own people, who, by the way, are not our own people just because they're brown and Black. And I really appreciated that about all your works. Jason, is this, again, like this idea of go find that Indigenous film critic when an Indigenous film comes out. But we are in the age of reservation dogs. Do we really need that, whatever you say, that bucketing or like this pigeonholing of writers, journalists, however we identify?
Well, I got a lot of work last year, so I'm not complaining. I'm not going to complain. I mean, I might be like a little different in the sense that like I don't mind being filling that niche, because like again, I came to this as a filmmaker, as someone who makes short films. I've acted, written, directed, produced, and I felt like I filled in a spot that needed to be filled. And like I said last year, I mean, I was talking to you about that Indigenous media explosion that happened like 3 years ago with Reservation Dogs, Dark Winds, and Rutherford Falls. Like those are 3 mainstream television shows that were written, directed, acted from the top to the bottom with Indigenous people, and that has not happened in television like ever. Like we finally had our own representation, which is amazing. And so I had a lot to write about, and I saw other people that were writing about it, like white people. I didn't feel like they were actually getting the gist of what was happening, and so that's kind of where I came in. I was just like, I'm gonna write about this. And actually, I did not pitch last year. I turned down things last year because there was so much work, and now I have a new car, or a newish car. So I'm not complaining again.
Congratulations.
I could finally go home to Oklahoma and go to my powwow that I have not been able to go to in a long time. But the point being is like I don't mind being that critic. I don't even know if I hope that we continue this trend. I don't know if it's going to continue, but I hope so. Not for me, like for work or anything, but just because we need that representation. We need to be seen as real people. People need to see us as not just like stoic individuals that live in teepees. We're contemporary people, live in the here and now. It's needed, you know.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think that it's the same thing you said. Like, I love being Black. I love writing about Black stuff. I also think that there's a lot of laziness among majority critics. And I just like to call that out, you know, because I'm not saying that they should, you know, write everything about the, you know, diverse movies that are coming out. But, I mean, they have for a long time. But, again, like, do your research. Like, care about the thing that you're watching. You know, I am often called on to write about movies that center the Asian American experience. I am not Asian American, but I do research, and I try to empathize with that group and see what particular context that movie is dealing with and learn as much as I can about it. And I would just add that this whole thing about us disagreeing, like us criticizing things that are popular, like this is literally like I spent like much of last year in the library reading from the archive at Harvard where I was doing a fellowship and reading about the film criticism that came out around Birth of a Nation. And there were Black people who liked Birth of a Nation, okay? There were Black people, most of the Black people who didn't, but we have been disagreeing like in our community like since the beginning of film criticism, and that is a normal thing, no one should expect anything different.
Yeah, this is the business of disagreement. Like, we're in it, and again, like, we're in it to debate, to have those fights. There's nothing I like more than just sitting over a cup of something and just tearing down a film or just like rising to my feet defending it. Like, that's what we do. Jason, yeah.
I just wanted to add one more thing. It's our community of filmmakers is very small, indigenous filmmakers. So it is actually, it can get awkward for me because I know a lot of these people are my friends, and I'm trying to stay true to criticism, and I don't want to be like what did you say, like like a booster or whatever? Booster. Yes. Yeah, so I'm trying to stay true to the art of criticism while at the same time not pissing off my friends too much, because like, it's a fine line, I should say, because I'm friends with with Sterling. Like, we're both Muskogee, and we went to school together. Sterling Harjo, showrunner of Reservation Dogs. Yeah, I know a lot of these folks, so it creates interest. It can get a little awkward.
Yeah, and it's also us being friends with these people. We also know how hard it was for them to make that first pilot, first film, whatever. Angelica, I would love for you to weigh in.
I think one of the things with regards to just, being a Black critic and being assigned Black films and how to navigate writing about them, for me at New York Magazine, there's definitely been a tension because I think I get assigned the Black films and I can write about so much more, but at the same time, I see how other people write about Black films and I can tell, like, they don't care about Blackness. They care what they can take from Blackness, but they don't really care about the actual particulars of things and don't really think that there's anything new they can learn or experience in Black film, which I notice amongst a lot of film critics. I just, like, especially even just on something like Letterboxd, I've noticed, like, the limits of people's imagination is Blackness. Blackness enters the room and something weird happens to people. But with regards to, like, also intra-community disagreement, I think that's healthy. People need to be better about conflicts and disagreements. And, like, we come to art to, like, discuss things, to challenge ourselves. Why should the criticism be flat and, like, merely supportive? For me, I'm going to be honest, like, there's a lot of Black films out there that I do not like, and I will not be quiet about if I have issues with them. I've never subscribed to the idea that because of how Hollywood moves, we need to support everything. Because in supporting the work that isn't good or isn't there, or maybe even depicts a very narrow vision of Blackness, we're not going to get more work from people who are doing great things. Hollywood likes to reproduce what gets support. So I try to be very careful with how I support things, and not to say I'll, totally set a film on fire just because. I'm very careful with what I do talk about publicly and if it's worth it. But I don't know, I think criticism is such rich territory and we're living in such a fraught, weird, surreal historical moment that it requires us as critics, as journalists, as artists to meet that moment with honesty, and that's what I hope to do, whether I'm writing about Black film or not. Lord knows I can write about damn near anything, and I have a lot of expertise beyond that, from anime to classic Hollywood, you know what I mean? But I love writing about Black film because I think there's so much not appreciated in that territory.
But also on that note, Angelica's review of Poor Things was excellent. So you guys, that's not a black film, so you guys should read it. But
Who understands white people better than black people? You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
You know, or any people of any, you know, marginalized group understands, you know, the majority group much better than they understand themselves.
Yeah, I remember my friend Chloe's mom, amazing black woman, she read Hillbilly Elegy when it came out. And she was like, why is everyone whining in this film, in this book? And again, to your point that, you know, why are you whining? Like, you know, what is your life is not as hard as you think it is, that you have to write a book about it. Not a political endorsement, but I want, and Angelica, let me again start with you because you are that rare species of a full-time critic. I want to know what your relationship with the term general audience is.
Okay, I'm gonna be honest, and I guess now that I'm not in person, I'm gonna be even spicier to keep everybody's attention. I don't really give a fuck about general audience. I think a lot about audience though, because the audience that New York Magazine and Vulture, whom I work for, have in mind is not the audience I necessarily write for. For me, I'm writing very specifically to black people a lot of times. Or sometimes I like this exercise of writing a review with a very specific friend in mind, so it almost feels like an intimate conversation. I always like the idea of my work, whether it's a review, whether it's a longer essay, whether it's a book I'll write in the future. I like the vibe, I want the vibe of my work to be like you're talking to a friend over martinis in a very intimate setting, and it's dishy and fun and intimate. I keep coming back to a sense of intimacy. But general audience, I think it can be dangerous to get too obsessed with speaking to everyone because that's impossible. So I try to go in the other direction, and I'm very specific about things. Now, does New York Magazine think like that? No, they don't. But Angelica, Jade, Bastién does.
Thank you. Who do you all write for? Who do you think is reading your work when you write?
I mean, honestly, I think that's the editor's job. That's the traditional journalist in me. The reason I don't have a blog is because I believe strongly that part of the process is being edited.
Thank you. I really have, as an editor,
it's no shade again to people who have blogs. I'm just saying that, and that's part of the conversation I hope we'll have about the crisis in arts journalism and in journalism overall, is that, I don't know, I could never get a new car from what I do. And no one should ever think that I do this for anything other than because of the passion of film, because it is very hard to keep doing this. One of the reasons I did the fellowship is because I wanted to quit, and there is no money in it. And even, the New York Times pays really poorly. So, it's not something that I do in any reason for clout or money. This is not something you do for money. But I do think that I just write, my whole thing is what is the reason to watch this movie? And I try to have that's if I had to distill it down, I'm trying to give people a rundown on why they might watch it.
Yeah, now we've, opened the hornet's net. So, hornet's nest, sorry. When I started, all through my criticism career, I've had day jobs. I have never for once thought, I live in New York, I never for once thought this will make me rent. And so I would, again, look at it as, how do you make rent writing criticism, but also who are you writing for? And are you thinking of making rent when you're writing for them?
And actually, Scene pays better than anyone, so.
Yes.
I'm not just saying that because I'm here.
Anyone. I can attest to that, yes. Jason.
I should say,
now that you have a new car.
It wasn't a brand new car. It was a newish car. But I should stipulate that. And then I had a couple of other jobs with Apple too. But that came from the writing also. So it was all connected. What what was I going to say? Oh, edit, like what you were saying. I depend on an editor too to rein me in and kind of reframe what I might be doing if I'm going too far this way or this way. And I don't mind being edited. I love a good editor. Like, they will make me look better. Please edit me, that's what I say. Like, and I'm writing, I guess, I assume people know film and art and culture. I don't dumb down things. I assume that they understand what I'm saying. And if they don't, then the editor will remind me to fix it or whatever.
Jason?
Yeah. I think maybe a couple things I wrote. I got myself a bottle of tequila. I don't know. They never paid me enough to get even a used car. It doesn't pay to tell truth, right? It doesn't pay to write period these days, but it doesn't pay to tell truth. You end up getting scapegoated mostly, but I think the Didion quote is, we tell ourselves stories in order to live, right? We preserve our sanity through affirming the reality that we know is true. So I'm not afraid of offending people. This is the thing. When you say that it's brave to write some of these things, to an extent, I agree. To another extent, I question what skin the person writing has in the game if they think they're being brave. So if you think it's brave to say that it's absurd that Lin-Manuel Miranda is regarded as one of the great hip-hop artists of this generation, the Puerto Rican aristocrat I went to Wesleyan with, if you think it's brave of me to say that, I'm going to disagree. I'm always going to say that because I'm from where I'm from. So I have to maintain some integrity and also the value of the lives of the people who put in the work for that genre and the neighborhoods from which it came, right? So I actually don't think it's brave. I think people get nervous when they network and they rely on these other people and they're worried about what cocktail parties they can't go to. That is of no importance to me. Something that someone said, and I forgive me for not remembering who said this, I think it was you. It was about criticism, right? There was this incredible range of criticism. And so I got a good friend who's an English professor who goes in the archives and does the FOIA requests. And if you look at 1970s Black intellectualism, if you look at the Black Panther Party newsletter, which contained letters from Clarence Thomas, there is a spectrum of opinion that would blow our minds in 2024. 2024, we've become so tribal and our politics are so doctrinaire. You're either on this side or that side, and that destroys discourse. It lets the foil set the agenda, actually. Because once the foil says, here's how I feel about this, you're like, I'm against that. Sometimes the foil is smart enough to take a couple criticisms that you should have and tell you that they support it, and then you're like, I gotta be against that. That doesn't work. It can't be this or that. And I think even in the 70s, which was, all about discontent, uplift, the idea of revolution, everyone disagreed vehemently. And they still cared for each other, and they understood that the idea was collective uplift and a bettering of discourse. I don't know in the social media era that that's what we have anymore. And that's what scares me the most about this.
Yeah, and we have 10 minutes to air all our grievances. But, sometimes I also think of criticism as something that's seen as easy. Like, there have been times, and I'm not saying everyone has to go to school to write film, to go to film school to write film criticism. I'm not saying that. But there have been so many times where I've met someone at a party and I've said, oh, I'm a film critic. And they're like, oh, my nephew has a blog too. Or like they'll send me a link to their letterbox. And which again, is fine. Like, democratization of any industry is healthy and great. But what does it, Angelica, I'll start with you. What does it feel to be told that your job, which you definitely have a special talent for, can be done by anyone?
Yeah, I know that's bullshit. Because I see how people write, even people who have my same type, some of whom may be at my same magazine. I just don't even try to concern myself with that, because it's just like, I think it's a broader thing where people just in general think that, oh yeah, I could totally write a book. I can totally write an essay, it's low overhead. You just need you and some paper or your laptop, but you also need years of research and understanding and consideration and archival diving, as I like to call it. I think it's very easy to look at writing, no matter the form, but to look at it as something easy to do and that anyone can do it. I do not agree with that, not just because I'm a writer, but because we've all read like very bad writing. So we know that it's not actually that easy. It's such a, sometimes can feel like a very isolating form of art, depending on how you approach it. But, I think that's just like an easy thing for people to say. It's a weird thing for people to say in an age where media literacy is dead in a ditch, or at least feels like it. But yeah, I just don't take that seriously. I find it comical, I laugh, and I keep it moving, because if it was that easy, then we'd have way better writing out there.
Thank you. Quickly, what do you want the future of criticism to look like?
Well, I just think that most criticism, specifically in legacy publications, has nothing to do with how we actually receive our media today. Like, they're still writing in this like old, like the way they do the reviews, and just the whole structure of it feels outdated to me, honestly. So I'm thinking a lot about like, how do we innovate? I'm working on a podcast about film criticism. I don't know any details about it, but you can follow me if you want to find out about it eventually.
Yeah, please find each of these people on social media and let's follow them.
Yeah, because I think that the people who have decision-making power about what goes out are just really out of touch with how we receive and what we want to know and what would be useful to us as consumers of media. So I'm looking for innovation.
Jason's?
I just hope we continue to have more Indigenous media and people to write about it, and people to take that writing seriously. I'm very hopeful. I hope that continues.
Jason.
Man, I have so much to say, so let me not ramble. You said, who understands white people better than black people? The marginalized are sharper critics, right? Because their lives depend on understanding the dysfunction of dominant society, right? If it's all working out for you, it's like a pimp once said, I'm liking what's liking me. If the system's liking me, I'm liking it. I'm not gonna scrutinize it. I'm getting everything from it, right? And that's important. Remember your place in the system, and remember something that I think is so essential to what's hurt criticism. What you write about Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese, what you write about TV shows, that shit's not radical. That is capitalism. That is people getting you to invest in meaningless, distracting debates, right? You have to remember to keep your focus, to treasure your perspective as someone who's on the outskirts, and not to get sucked into content, right? These meaningless debates that are really in support of brands that you have no reason to argue about. You have to focus, because in the attention economy, your social capital, your political energy is so valuable, and they're getting us to invest it in bad product, terrible 500-word pieces about things that don't matter to our lives. So I think there has to be a refocusing of what we talk about. And I don't want to hold it against people. I know people who write poorly, and I understand, because people are offering money and we have to pay rent. I'm not angry at them. But we have to understand, I think about this because there's a person I know who once boasted on social media, I don't even have an MFA in my book. I'm like, well, I can tell because I read your book, brother. There are things, elements of gatekeeping that are important. Quality, rigor. We need that, and we have to keep that in mind. So sometimes it's democratization is good, access is good. Remember the integrity of purpose. Why are you doing this? What are you contributing to the collective? We can't lose that.
Thanks, Jason. Before I open it up to the audience, Angelica, what is your hope for the future of criticism?
I would say my hope for the future of criticism is, to piggyback on what everyone else has said, innovation, refocusing on what matters actually, letting go and not even giving attention to, moving as if we should be fans of the work, as if there's no nuance in discussing art. I want to see criticism from people that is hungry, that is curious, that is making bold connections, that is pulling from a lot of different sources and placing these works of art within a historical and cultural context that is edifying and bold for the reader. That's what I hope for in the future. I hope for a lot of things, but I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Now I'll stop talking. Audience.
And while we're doing that, I'll just say really quickly that James Agee, who was like the first famous like film critic, white guy, he knew nothing about film criticism before he got his job at The Nation. And then 2 years later, he was asked to make the first list of films that should be preserved in the National Film Archive or the Library of Congress, solely because he went to school with the person who made that decision. So I think sometimes we're hard on ourselves, and I'm not saying we shouldn't strive for excellence, believe me, but they don't all get it because they did the work either. Yeah, so.
And if we talked a little bit about archive digging, and I just wanted to shout out Maya Cade, who's been doing fantastic work with Black Film Archives. Please check her work out. She's fantastic. Now over to the audience for Joe.
Ooh, that is my voice. I'm here. My name's India. Hello, thank you for your time. I'm curious to know, where is the love, personally, in your work? And as an extension of that, what has surprised you about the development of your voice in this work?
I love that question. Thank you. I loved Shatara's film last night. How many of you all got to see it last night? Wasn't that amazing? Oh my gosh. That's what I really want to talk to. I want to talk with people about the movies they love. Like, I wish there was more space for me to do that, and for me to gush about the movies that I love. Yeah, because I think for me, I'll just be brief, is that's really why I do this, is because I love movies, I love filmmakers, I love you all. There's nothing I love more than talking to an artist about our work or researching an artist's work and trying to really get inside of their creativity. And I just think it's extremely powerful and fulfilling. And that surprised me about my voice. Well, I grew up in a house where no one honestly really cared what I thought. So I'm as shocked as anyone to be giving my opinions for pay.
Please don't stop.
I too am also surprised to be getting paid for my opinions. But as far as love, I really love Indigenous futurism films. There's been like 3 in the past 5 years, and I hope for more of those because I'm really inspired when those happen. Blood Quantum and Night Raiders are the 2 my favorite ones over the past 5 years. And what was the other question? Shit.
What surprised you about your voice?
What surprised you about you?
I'm becoming less worried about what people think. I could give a fuck now. I just write. And then I feel like I'm getting sharper with each piece because I don't care as much. And the editors will come in and edit and stuff, but I'm getting a lot more freedom with each piece, and I like that. And I think it makes the work that I do sharper.
My favorite uncle passed in December. He was a legend, incredible aura, handsome boxer who messed his life up with heroin, member of the FOI security detail. You talk about containing multitudes. And if someone just looked at him, they wouldn't know anything about him. So I always talk about him because I loved him, right? And that's personal to me. I didn't write about American fiction because I cared about the movie. I wouldn't have touched it, except I had been teaching erasure by a brilliant black author for 12 years. That came from a place of love. I talked about hip hop because I grew up where I grew up with my family in the industry. It's about maintaining the integrity of the subject and the history of it. So I can't write criticism ever unless it comes from love. And I think if I just saw someone walking down the street with a bad outfit on, I don't understand that kind of criticism. Like the person who's like, look at that shit. I could never do that. So anything that I write is motivated by preserving something I love, and that's my rule.
And does something about the way your voice is
Nothing
evolved.
surprises me about my voice. I've been an asshole my whole life. I've been asking questions forever. What surprises me is that people actually listen to it. You know, it's kind of like podcasts. I once had a podcast with a group of people about sports, now defunct, and we had a big following, and there wasn't a single day that I understood why anyone listened to us. I couldn't believe people would sit down for an hour and listen to people talk. And so the most shocking thing about my voice is the most heartening thing, and I think that's what most writers feel, right? That people respond to it, and that's the most beautiful thing, is that your voice can actually provoke community, and that's the most rewarding thing about it.
Angelica.
For me personally, where the love is in my work is in everything I do. I always write from a place of passion, sometimes even obsession. I write because I love the art forms I'm writing about. I write because I love Black people and I want to give them a very specific, nuanced, in-depth perspective on these works. You know, for me, even though I think I have a reputation for being like someone who does takedowns and writes very venomous reviews, I actually think all the work I do comes from a place of love and passion and curiosity. And in terms of what surprised me about my voice as it's grown over the years, is that instead of being hardened by the industry, I've become softer, sweeter, more curious, and a little weirder. I like this version of me as a critic, and I'm excited to see how weird and passionate and curious I get in the future as well.
Questions?
Hi. I was interested in this balance between subjectivity and objectivity, and I wanted to ask you, in your critiquing experience, what was the most memorable quote that was pulled from one of your critic reviews that was, used to support or encourage a film going forward? And was there a little story about how you, in crafting the critique, were thinking of certain things that could make the case for being, like the word of mouth thing that I read that then I pass on based on a full review or full read of the critique? Does that make?
American Fiction did not pull any quotes from Jason's piece. I can vouch for that. But
I mean, I would just say quickly that I can't remember any quotes. I can't remember anything, to be honest. But for me, an accidental, fulfilling part of this job is that when you write at a film festival, and then that helps determine whether a movie gets bought. So there's a movie that I wrote about. God, I feel so bad. I can't remember the name. But you remember in Awkward Black Girl, the Indian friend, Issa's Indian friend, who's an amazing filmmaker. Her first film I reviewed, and she sent me an email after it was bought saying, it was because of your review that this film got bought. And that really moved me because I didn't know her. I didn't know any, it wasn't like we were friends or anything like that. But, I just said honestly what I thought of it. And I think that's also a reason why I continue to do this, because I thought it was great and I'm glad that it got bought.
Angelica, did you want to add something to that?
Yeah, I know there's probably little quotes that have ended up being used for marketing, but that doesn't really happen that often for me. I think, to piggyback on what she was saying, like, it's the things I remember are when, like, the filmmakers for smaller films that I've, like, really championed reach out to me, and that's when I'm like, oh, I guess, sometimes you can feel like, does anyone read this criticism if it's not like a takedown? Like, do you guys care about this stuff? But people do. And so, like, one of the most heartwarming examples was this small British horror film called Kindred about a Black woman whose white partner died, and she finds out she's pregnant, and she basically gets trapped in a house by his mother, played by Fiona Shaw. It is one of the most frightening, heartbreaking films I've seen. And I didn't see many people talking about it, so I really like kind of hyped it up, and I was like, this is so worth watching. And I got an email from the director, and I thought it was just really kind, and it meant a lot that like, you know, they connected with what I wrote about, and they felt like it was bringing eyes to the film, because I do think it's an amazing film. So stuff like that, you know, sticks out. But I try not to like, actually I don't have to try. I don't really care about the whole being quoted and, you know, ending up on a poster, because I don't know, I look sideways at that sometimes, because I don't necessarily want to be like at the forefront or even too involved in the marketing of a movie, you know, with my quotes. I prefer to just kind of talk about it. But yeah, that's kind of how I feel about that dynamic.
And that film was Definition Please by Sujata Day, and it's on Netflix.
A part of the question was also about this idea of balancing objectivity and subjectivity. How do you do that, if you do that at all?
I think that comes from love too. You know, when I went away to college, I was working on a thesis about 1970s black feminist literature. It was the reinscription of patriarchal bias in 1970s black literature, specifically such and such and such, right? My advisor was a woman named Gail Pemberton, a brilliant black woman, saved my life. But nobody in my family would ever read that shit. Just the jargon alone, and that's what it taught me. So it's like, okay, I'm writing, but who's my audience, right? Who do I want to read this? And so I think these things coincide in terms of, you know, where I write from in terms of what I love, but also the people who reach out to me. So there was a hip hop journalist who's kind of iconic who reached out to me in the, you know, the DMs or what, I don't do social media. Is that the Twitter DMs? And was like, hey, this and this and this. I sent this to Jay-Z, he read it and loved it. That mattered to me zero. Jay-Z's a rapper, right? But there was an author who wrote in one line, an author who I grew up reading, just said, thank you. And that made me pour a single glass of Hennessy, because that felt like the biggest accomplishment, and it felt like we had achieved a kinship. I had reached the kind of person who I would hope would write for me, because he had written for me, right? And so I think it's important to also understand when you critique, not to condescend, to respect the intelligence of your audience. And when I can reach somebody who otherwise might have seen this film and not cared one way or the other and said, yeah, this hit, I just couldn't articulate it. That's important to me. So I keep that in mind at all times.
Jason?
Well, I look at like a technical excellence, like a cinematography. That objectively, I would look at that. It's something like, is that done well or not? But then story is subjective. It's like, do I connect with this? Do I connect with this story? Does it hit me right here in the heart? Does it make me cry? Does it make me mad? That's subjective. And if it affects certain parts, if the story affects certain parts of me successfully in that way, that's subjective, and I'm fully I'm going to write that, because that's how I connect to that story. So those kind of two different things. Like I'm looking at two different things when I'm writing a piece. So, you know, the technical aspects, and then do I feel it? You know.
Are we at time? Okay, no, we have a question.
Hi, my name is Dana Younghouse from the Younghouse Theater Journal, one of those pesky blogger people. But I noticed that if me and my partner didn't write our criticism, a lot of people fell through the cracks. And so how do you balance wanting to write for people who are being lost and for kind of maintaining being mainstream writers?
I've been starting off on a lot of these questions.
Well, I agree with you completely. What you said, by the way, what you said resonates with me in terms of AG, right? And I want to make this clear. Look, I don't, credentialism is not important to me. I do think you have to do the work, and there has to be intellectual rigor. But I am a lost person. I didn't come to this from traditional pathways. And I don't want you to ever come away from here thinking I'm like, hey, we need more gatekeeping, AKA get some of these bloggers out of here. I think the good stuff is good. I think the people who operate with integrity of purpose are my people, and it doesn't matter where they write. you know? So I think that work is incredibly important, and I really apologize if I've come across in any way as denigrating it. I'm not saying you're saying that, but I hope that's clear. That is not anything I would ever say. Those are my people, you know? Those are my people. I feel kindred with them, and you recognize the quality. Just like music, when you hear it, you know it, and that's how you build community. And we can't forget the importance of building community, right? We can't forget when we read something that we like, that we should contact those people or see what else they write. We've never been more connected in terms of being able to understand the superficial things we say and post in terms of pictures, and we've never been more isolated in terms of the real bonds that we're building, right? And we need to bring that back desperately.
I would just say, you know, write the piece, paint the painting, make the film. Just do what you got, do what you want to do. You don't need anyone's permission to do. If you have the love and the passion for it, then do it, you know. I highly encourage it.
But have a day job because you need to pay rent. What's that? But have a day job because you need to pay rent.
Yes, have a day job, yeah.
Do we have more questions? Or are we at time? Okay. So we are at time. Thank you, each of you, for joining us. Angelica, it's a pity you're not with us in person, but thank you for zooming in. Thank you to our interpreters, and thank you all for coming out on a hot summer day. Thank you.